Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we try to cut through the noise and get you truly well-informed. Today, we're tackling something, well, something most of us probably take as a given. This idea that science and religion are just, fundamentally at odds, locked in this eternal battle, especially over the really big questions about existence.
Right.
But is that really the whole story? Is it actually that simple? Like, science just disproves faith, end of discussion.
It's such a deeply ingrained narrative, isn't it? That clash between faith and reason, it often feels like, well, an undisputed fact.
Yeah.
But what's so interesting about this deep dive, I think, is how it really challenges that very assumption. It shows the relationship is far more complex, more nuanced than we usually imagine.
Absolutely. So we're diving into a pretty powerful book today by David Berlinski, The Devil's Delusion, Atheism and Its Scientific Pretensions. And our mission really is to unpack the arguments he's making, they're quite bold, and explore how these scientific claims intersect with, deeply human questions.
Yeah, the big stuff.
Exactly. And hopefully reveal some surprising insights into what science can actually claim to know and maybe what it can't. So get ready for, hopefully, a fresh perspective on a debate that's been going on for centuries.
Should be interesting.
So let's start with what Berlinski provocatively labels new atheism. He says this isn't like the quiet agnosticism of the past.
No, it's different.
He describes it as a new wave almost of militant atheism. And he points to prominent scientists Richard Dawkins, Victor Stinger, Steven Weinberg spearheading it, launching what he calls a wide-ranging attack on religious belief and sentiment.
And what's really striking is the absolute conviction behind it. You hear these claims like science must destroy religion or even that religion poisons everything. Really strong stuff.
Wow. Yeah.
The core belief seems to be that science and religion are just inherently in conflict. They cannot both be right.
Black and white.
Exactly. And crucially, these views often lean heavily on, the power and the glory of the Western scientific tradition for their authority. Almost as if science itself, as a monolith, is making these pronouncements.
That's such a strong stance, isn't it? Science must destroy religion. It almost sounds like a caricature.
It does.
But Berlinski pushes back right away. He suggests, okay, if science is this unshakable fortress of objective truth, then maybe we should look at its own foundations.
Turn the lens around a bit.
Right. He explores how science itself actually relies on forms of belief or assumptions that we often overlook. He has this interesting idea that science is a word exhausted by its examples.
What does he mean by that exactly?
Well, he refers to what he calls the four isolated miracles of Western scientific theories: Newtonian mechanics, Maxwell's electromagnetism, relativity, and quantum mechanics.
Ah, the big ones.
Yeah, he sees them as these singular, incredibly profound achievements, but maybe not necessarily part of some continuously unfolding inevitable method.
Okay, I see. So not just steps on a ladder, but maybe more like monumental breakthroughs.
Kind of. And this raises that crucial point. What about the very act of doing science? Berlinski actually quotes Hebrews 11.1.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And he argues, look, this applies just as much to science.
Oh, how so?
He says, physicists, for example, they marvel at nature's beauty and simplicity. They operate on this deep belief, or maybe faith is the word, that the universe is coordinated by a great plan.
Right. That underlying assumption of order and comprehensibility.
Exactly. So the core insight isn't just that science is powerful, but that its very foundation, despite all the empirical claims, shares this surprising philosophical connection with belief. It's about seeing the unstated assumptions that even let science get off the ground.
That's a fascinating point, that connection between the scientific pursuit and a kind of faith.
It really makes Berlinski's argument provocative from the start. But then he takes aim at something we all, learned in school, the scientific method.
Ah, yes. Observe, hypothesize.
Predict, test, modify. Yeah, that 5-step outline. But Berlinski basically calls it trivial. Says it could apply to any human undertaking, even playing golf.
Golf, okay.
He bluntly says not a single one of these 5 sentences makes the slightest sense as a unique description of what science is. And he challenges that assertion that there's only one way of knowing, the empirical way that is the basis of science. He asks, well, what about mathematics or law or just, how we talk and understand each other every day? Are those not knowing?
That's a fair question. If we connect this to how people see science, it highlights a real tension. The book suggests that quite a few people in the public see the scientific community as maybe self-righteous, vain, politically immature, and arrogant. Yeah. And while science often praises itself for being uniquely self-critical, Berlinski points to this counter-narrative that maybe critics are unneeded. And since they are unneeded, they are not welcome.
A kind of echo chamber.
Potentially.
Yeah.
He even mentions figures like Richard Dawkins describing science as the apotheosis of the intellect and the consummation of the Renaissance. It paints a picture of a field maybe so confident in itself that it can sometimes resist genuine self-correction.
It definitely makes you think about how we perceive science as, an institution, not just a method.
Right.
And finally, in this first part, let's touch on methodological naturalism. This is usually explained as the foundation of the natural sciences, right? The idea that natural phenomena can be explained without reference to supernatural beings or events.
Standard definition.
But Berlinski points out a kind of paradox. If it's truly a foundation, can it really be merely methodological, like just a tool you pick up and put down?
Good point. If it's foundational, it's more like an assumption you're making from the start.
Exactly. And he notes that you don't actually find the word or the idea explicitly laid out in the great physical theories. He gives the example of Isaac Newton,
The giant himself.
who believed his most beautiful system of the universe, his laws, could only proceed from the counsel and domination of an intelligent and powerful being. Not exactly methodological naturalism there.
No, quite the opposite. And this really challenges that simple end of the matter is matter view some materialists might hold. Modern physics, Berlinski describes its material world as Baroque and promiscuously Catholic.
Baroque, promiscuously Catholic.
Yeah, meaning it's full of all sorts of weird and wonderful things, quarks, leptons, fields, symmetries, black holes. It's not a simple clockwork, easily materialist universe anymore.
It's way stranger than that.
Exactly. It's astonishingly complex, which hints that matter itself is far more mysterious than that simple label implies. It really raises questions about what material even means at the most fundamental level.
So, if science itself is grappling with its own foundational assumptions, maybe it's not so surprising that it also faces profound questions when we look outwards to the biggest puzzle, the universe itself.
Makes sense.
Which brings us to probably the oldest, most universal question there is. What caused the universe?
Yeah.
And the simple answer, almost childlike, is just something.
Right. It leads naturally to the cosmological argument.
Yeah.
The ancient Arabic argument, the kalam argument, puts it very plainly. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. So the universe had a cause. Simple logic.
Seems straightforward.
But the book notes that maybe the most powerful version comes from Thomas Aquinas. He identified that first cause with God because, well, by definition, it has to be uncaused. Something had to start it all without being started itself.
Okay. And if the universe did truly have a beginning, that immediately brings up an old idea, doesn't it?
It does.
The book points out how the Big Bang, this relatively new idea in physics, suddenly seemed to suggest an old idea in thought. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth.
Yeah, that connection was not lost on people. And what's really fascinating is the unease this apparently caused among some atheist astrophysicists, people like Fred Hoyle, even Stephen Hawking.
Really? Unease. Why?
Well, they found the idea of a universe with a definite beginning alarming, apparently, because it suddenly allowed for the possibility of a creator. It opened a door they thought science was closing.
Wow. So the science itself pointed towards something philosophically uncomfortable for them.
Exactly. And the evidence for this beginning, as Berlinski lays it out, became pretty compelling. You had Vesto Slipher and then Edwin Hubble observing galactic redshift.
The Doppler effect for light, showing galaxies are moving away.
Precisely. Which led to the conclusion that the universe is expanding. Then, this connected to Einstein's general relativity, which apparently to his own pained surprise, also implied an expanding or contracting universe, not the static one he initially expected.
So the theory matched the observation.
It did. And then came the astonishing discovery of the cosmic microwave background radiation by Penzias and Wilson that really anchored Big Bang cosmology into accepted fact.
The afterglow of the Big Bang.
You got it. So the takeaway here is that the Big Bang, far from, destroying the idea of a creator, actually made it scientifically plausible in a way that even skeptical physicists found unsettling. It turned a philosophical question into a scientific one. Quite unexpectedly.
It really is astonishing how the science, piece by piece, just painted this picture of a universe with a beginning. You can almost feel that intellectual discomfort he describes.
Yeah.
But then we get to what the book calls the inconvenient truth, the observation that the universe looks suspiciously like a fix or a put-up job.
He quotes physicists like Paul Davies and Fred Hoyle making similar points.
Right. We're talking about the incredible fine-tuning of physical constants. Things like the cosmological constant that governs the universe's expansion rate.
Or the fine structure constant controlling electromagnetic interactions.
Exactly. Or even the ratio between neutrons and protons. The point is, if these values were even slightly different, just a tiny bit,
Poof! No life as we know it. Utterly impossible.
it raises these huge questions. Why do the constants and parameters of theoretical physics obey such tight constraints? I mean, why? And fundamentally, why are the laws of nature true? Why these laws and not others?
And the obvious answer, as Berlinski puts it, often offered by theologians, is simple. The universe looks like a put-up job because it is a put-up job.
Makes logical sense, in a way.
But as he explains, that answer is often emotionally unacceptable to many physicists. It feels like giving up on a natural explanation. So they look for alternatives.
And this search for alternatives leads us to things like the landscape of many universes, right? The megaverse, proposed by string theory.
That's the idea. You multiply universes almost infinitely. By doing that, you effectively dissolve improbabilities. Suddenly, life-friendly conditions aren't miraculous. They become a sure thing somewhere in this vast multiverse.
Okay. And this often gets paired with the anthropic principle.
Right, which basically says the universe must be such as to admit the creation of observers within it at some stage. Or, more simply, we're here because the universe happens to be suitable for us. If it weren't, we wouldn't be here to observe it.
It sounds a bit circular when you put it like that.
Well, Berlinski is highly critical of these ideas. He calls them contrivances. He points out they're still, based on an assumed set of laws, like string theory itself, that somehow have to apply across all these universes, even though the initial appeal was that anything goes somewhere.
So you still need unexplained laws to govern the multiverse generator.
Pretty much. He argues they embody an article of faith themselves and are vulnerable to the sadness of doubt. They seem to exist mainly because physicists write papers about them, not because there's direct evidence. Philosophically, Berlinski suggests this represents a kind of moral relativism in physical thought, and he cites Richard Dawkins preferring many worlds than one God as evidence of, prejudice.
Strong words again.
And he includes a rather awkward admission from physicist Leonard Susskind, who apparently said that if this whole landscape idea fails, physicists will be hard-pressed to answer the intelligent design critics.
Wow. So, okay, let's shift gears now and turn our gaze inward to human nature itself.
Right.
There are many prominent scientific voices suggesting that we humans are, quote, nothing but the living record of an extended evolutionary process. And this view is often promoted almost like a moral virtue.
Like it's enlightened to accept we're just animals.
Kind of. The idea that our minds are simply the product of evolution is often presented as an unassailable fact. Done deal.
But what's really surprising here, historically speaking, is the dissent. Berlinski highlights Alfred Wallace,
Co-creator of evolution theory with Darwin.
Exactly. Wallace himself came to doubt that evolution could fully explain certain uniquely human features.
Like what?
Things like the sheer complexity of the human brain, our capacity for speech, the incredible dexterity of the human hand, especially what's called ulnar opposition, the thumb touching the pinky, crucial for tool use and fine manipulation, and even just walking upright.
So fundamental human characteristics.
Yes. He asked, do we understand why alone among the animals human beings have acquired language? Or a refined and delicate moral system, or art, architecture, music, dance, or mathematics, things that seem worlds apart from basic survival needs.
And Wallace argued, what?
He argued that these higher human abilities must be latent in primitive man, existing before they were strictly needed for survival. But Berlinski points out this concept makes no sense in Darwinian terms, because natural selection typically weeds out complex traits that don't offer an immediate advantage. Why carry the overhead?
That's a fascinating historical wrinkle. So even when we hear the common claim, that human and chimpanzee genomes share the greater part of their respective genome.
Yeah, like 98% or something.
Right. The book just starkly contrasts that with the massive, undeniable differences in our anatomy and way of life. Brain size, pelvis shape, feet, jaws. Berlinski says nearly every bone is different.
So the genetic similarity doesn't tell the whole story.
Not even close, according to him. These vast physical and behavioral differences are attributed to genomic regulatory systems, the systems that control how genes are expressed, which are apparently of astonishing and poorly understood complexity.
So it's not just the genes, but how they're orchestrated.
Precisely. And Berlinski concludes that denying this profound human distinction from apes leads to what he provocatively calls a very characteristic form of inanity.
Inanity.
Yeah, he gives the example of trying to analyze Homer's Iliad as merely a drama of naked apes whose motivations are solely about access to females. It's his way of showing how reductive that just an ape view can become, missing the entire point of human culture and meaning.
That's a powerful illustration. And this leads us towards a really crucial question about that common metaphor, the brain as a computer.
Right. The idea that the mind is somehow swallowed up by the brain, and the brain itself is basically a computer, a biological machine.
A very popular analogy.
Very. But Berlinski challenges this. He says, okay, let's compare the brain not just to a modern computer, but to something logically similar, like a theoretical Turing machine, or even an abacus.
An abacus, seriously.
Stay with me. He argues, if the brain is just a computer, then the same basic thesis about the mind should hold whether we use the complex computer analogy or the simple abacus analogy, since they are, in principle, computationally equivalent in some ways.
Okay. Where is he going with this?
He points out the nakedness of interaction when a human uses an abacus. It's obvious the abacus can't set its own initial conditions. You have to position the beads. And a simple chain of physical causes in the abacus doesn't explain how the human mind imposes itself on matter to perform the calculation, to have the intention to understand the result.
I see. The abacus highlights the role of the external operator, the mind using the tool.
Exactly. So the point isn't just the brain isn't an abacus, duh. It's that the fundamental mystery of consciousness, of intention, of meaning, isn't solved by just calling the brain a machine, because that machine seems to need an external driver or programmer, which is the very mind we're trying to explain.
So the analogy breaks down because it misses the conscious agent.
Right. Berlinski argues the human mind is frankly magical in its nature.
Yeah.
Capable of intentions, goals, problems, and actions that no machine, no matter how complex, can currently replicate or explain. He quotes a physicist saying, "We have difficulty in seeing how any mechanism can give rise to it."
It's that hard problem of consciousness again.
It is. And this ties directly into the critique of genetic determinism. Evolutionary psychology often leads to the unwelcome conclusion that some form of genetic determinism must be true, that our minds are just an expression of his human genes.
The idea that our genes pulled the strings.
Yeah. But Berlinski highlights what he calls a strikingly successful exercise in self-delusion here. He points again to Richard Dawkins, who promotes the idea of humans as lumbering robots controlled by genes. Yet, in the same breath, Dawkins claims to be an implacable opponent of genetic determinism.
Huh. How does that work?
That's Berlinski's point, the internal contradiction. How can you be a robot controlled by genes and an implacable opponent of that very idea?
It does seem paradoxical.
So Berlinski concludes, look, we do not have a serious scientific theory explaining the powers and properties of the human mind. And the claim that it's simply a product of evolution is, in his view, barely coherent.
A strong critique.
Ultimately, he suggests the idea that man was created in the image of God remains what it has always been. And that is the instinctive default position of the human race. Whether you agree or not, that's his assessment of where things stand without a compelling scientific alternative.
Quite a statement to end that section on.
Indeed. So let's shift now to miracles, gaps in knowledge, and this idea of the God of the gaps.
Ah, yes, the famous critique.
It's often used as an insult, isn't it? Especially towards intelligent design, which sometimes gets dismissed as creationism in a cheap tuxedo.
Right. The idea is that the God of the gaps only rules over areas science hasn't explained yet. The gaps keep shrinking as science advances.
But Berlinski completely flips this argument around. He suggests, maybe, for all we know, it is the God of the gaps who is now creating gaps for himself to fill.
How does he mean that, creating gaps?
He argues that as science progresses and fills some gaps, it often simultaneously created gaps all over again, bigger ones even.
Like finding more questions than answers.
Exactly. His prime example is physics. General relativity and quantum mechanics are two largest visions of the physical world, and yet they are fundamentally alien to one another. They don't work together. That's a massive foundational gap science itself opened up.
That's true. The unification problem is huge.
And these gaps, Berlinski argues, are particularly glaring in biology. He says the god of the gaps occupies a very considerable comfort zone there.
Okay, biology's turn.
He cites the work of Eugene Koonin, a biologist who apparently made some very candid observations about major transitions in biological evolution. Koonin noted the sudden emergence of diverse forms at a new level of complexity.
Like the Cambrian explosion.
Presumably things like that, yeah.
Yeah.
And Koonin apparently says these transitions do not seem to fit the tree pattern of slow, gradual Darwinian evolution. And this applies to pretty much everything when it comes to major biological innovations.
Wow, pretty much everything.
That's the quote Berlinski uses. And Koonin also observed that no intermediate grades or intermediate forms between different types are detectable in the fossil record or even genetically for these major jumps. The links are missing.
The missing links problem writ large.
Seems so. Furthermore, Berlinski brings up the neutral theory of molecular evolution, which suggests that a lot of genetic change might be random drift, not driven by selection. To the extent that the theory is true, he argues, Darwin's theory is not the whole story.
So challenging the centrality of natural selection.
Right. And he highlights Michael Lynch's critique of Dawkins, suggesting natural selection might be neither necessary nor sufficient to account for the complexity of living systems.
That's a direct challenge.
It is. So Berlinski concludes, if the question is how life's incredible coherence and complexity arose from basically a random walk plus selection, the honest answer is we have no idea. And he adds this provocative bit about a kind of self-censorship among biologists, suggesting they tell one another with relief that it is a very good thing the public has no idea what the research literature really suggests.
That's quite an accusation of, well, lack of transparency.
It is. So moving from biology's gaps to arguably the biggest gap of all, consciousness.
The hard problem.
The book points to this profound, almost unfathomable gulf between physical processes, light hits your eye, electrical signals go to the brain.
Neurons firing.
Right, between that physical stuff and the actual conscious experience. The light enraptured awareness, as he puts it, to which they give rise. He says that awareness is unfathomably large because it spans an incommensurable distance from the physical process. You can't measure awareness in volts or chemicals.
It's the gap between the objective and the subjective.
Precisely. And it leads to this very simple yet profound point. If asked to stand and declare ourselves on the most elementary aspects of the world in which we live, we see it, we can say nothing about how that seeing happens as a conscious experience.
We can describe the mechanics, but not the experience itself.
Exactly. And the book quotes Steven Weinberg's famous line, reflecting a kind of unpunctuated despair. The more comprehensible the universe becomes, the more it also seems pointless.
A bleak outlook.
Very. And in this context, Berlinski imagines the god of the gaps having the last laugh, maybe observing. You have no idea whatsoever how the ordered physical, moral, mental, aesthetic, and social world in which you live could have ever arisen from the seething anarchy of the elementary particles. He finishes that thought with a powerful analogy. It is like imagining sea foam resolving itself into the Parthenon.
Wow. That really paints a picture of the scale of the challenge for purely material explanations.
It does. Which brings us to a final, powerful metaphor Berlinski uses throughout the book. Science as a cathedral.
Okay, I like that image.
He describes it as immense, something seen from every vantage point. It represents the symbol and the glory of faith in reason, progress in the 21st century.
And it has its famous saints, Newton, Einstein, Bohr, Feynman.
Exactly, honored for their contributions.
Yep.
But here's the twist in the metaphor. This grand cathedral, it's unfinished.
Not quite complete.
Far from it, he suggests. It has incompatible blueprints. We just talked about general relativity and quantum mechanics, these two monumental theories that just don't fit together. A fundamental incompatibility at the heart of physics.
A major structural problem.
Right. He says there's a stub where a spire should be, perhaps representing that unified theory. And the workmen who have put down their tools, they do not know how to proceed.
Stuck on the big questions.
Seems to be the implication. And beyond the technical issues, there are profound financial and philosophical problems. How do you even test some of these cutting-edge theories, like string theory? How could it be tested, he asks. And maybe even more fundamentally, echoing the earlier theme, how can faith be tested?
Drawing that parallel again.
Yes. And the book poses this internal question for the hypothetical cardinal overseeing this cathedral. Does our cathedral support the faith by which it is supported? Is the structure itself sound enough to justify the faith placed in it?
That's a really thought-provoking way to summarize the state of things, the knowns and the unknowns, in fundamental science.
So where does all this leave us? This whole deep dive seems to bring us back to a kind of core choice, doesn't it? With the ultimate sorts of order and meaning in the universe. Berlinski frames it as God, logic, or nothing.
Those seem like the big options.
And the book reiterates how many scientific atheists seem to choose nothing, meaning no inherent purpose or creator specifically to avoid God. But Berlinski argues this choice isn't neutral. It leads to things like that moral relativism in physical thought we discussed, like the multiverse being preferred over design.
A philosophical choice with scientific consequences.
Right. And the enduring tension then is that despite all our incredible scientific advancements, these really fundamental questions about origins, meaning consciousness, they remain.
They haven't gone away.
Not as weaknesses of science necessarily, but maybe as inherent limits to what science by its nature can explain. As Berlinski puts it, maybe the thing they had been so long avoiding, God or some form of transcendence, has managed to clamber back into contention as a living possibility in thought.
The questions persist.
They do. So maybe the final thought for you, listening, is this. In a world just awash in information, maybe even scientific hubris at times, perhaps understanding the limits of knowledge, whether that's scientific knowledge or even religious claims, might be the actual path to wisdom.
Knowing what we don't know.
Exactly. So what mysteries do you find yourself unexpectedly compelled by, maybe despite the standard scientific explanations? And how does recognizing the boundaries of what we truly know, or perhaps can know, change your perspective on it all? Something to think about.